When you think about World War I, Mexico probably isn't the first country that comes to mind. But Mexico was a lot more involved in the war than people tend to realize. Germany wanted Mexico to invade the US, and American-Mexican relations were so bad that some people thought they would actually do it. On this episode of Intrigued Mind, we take a look at Mexico's involvement in the First World War. You probably don't think of Mexico as being a country that had much to do with World War I, but that's not exactly true. In January of 1917, Germany knew that America was about to join the war. This was because they were about to institute their policy of indiscriminate submarine warfare and start attacking ships in the Atlantic with submarines, something they knew America was not going to like. Germany thought that if America was going to get involved, then they should try to get Mexico involved too. A problem on America's southern border could keep them distracted from Europe. Arthur Zimmerman, who worked in the Foreign Office of the German Empire, sent a telegram to Heinrich von Eckart, the German ambassador to Mexico. The telegram told Eckart that if it seemed like the US was going to enter the war, he should start talking to the Mexican government about a military alliance. Germany would offer to fund Mexico if they would attack America, and that wasn't all. Germany had a more generous offer. The telegram read, "We make Mexico a proposal of alliance on the following basis: make war together, make peace together. Generous financial support, and an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona." Germany wasn't just offering Mexico money to start a small diversion. They were telling Mexico that they would help them invade, reconquer, and permanently take back the parts of America that had originally been parts of Mexico. It was a bold offer that surely would have at least created a massive distraction for America. It would have been the only time apart from Pearl Harbor that America was actually attacked on its home soil in either World War. The Zimmerman telegram opens up the possibility for a strange alternate history where in World War I, America is actually fighting a two-front war against both Germany and Mexico. In hindsight, it sounds crazy, and of course it never actually went anywhere, but at the time, it was a genuine option. Before we dive into that, if you're interested in early access to videos and live chats with the creator of Intrigued Mind, consider subscribing to our Patreon. Your support will greatly help us keep the channel producing more intriguing content. The Germans thought it might be possible to spark a conflict between the two countries because America and Mexico really didn't get along at the time. A major tipping point was the so-called Tampico affair in 1914. It began as a relatively minor incident where some US Navy sailors came ashore to get supplies and were detained by Mexican forces, who were loyal to Mexican dictator General Victoriano Huerta. Commanding Navy Admiral Henry Mayo demanded that the sailors all be released, that Mexico issue an apology, and that Mexico actually raise the American flag and do a 21-gun salute. The sailors were released and Mexico did apologize. However, the salute was never done, as this was deemed too much of an affront to Mexican honor. Oddly, given his anathema to war, President Woodrow Wilson backed the admiral. The conflict escalated when Wilson ordered the Navy to occupy the Mexican port of Veracruz, while he was awaiting for official authorization from Congress so that the Navy could carry out his orders. He received some new intel. A delivery of weapons was headed for the port on board the German-registered cargo steamer, the SS Yperinga. Wilson decided that this was urgent enough to throw congressional authorization out the window, and he gave an immediate order to take over the port's customs office and confiscate the weaponry. Ironically, the weapons weren't actually from Germany. The weapons were from two people, an American named John Wesley Decay, who was a businessman with huge investments in Mexico, and a Russian arms dealer named Leon Rast. American newspapers at the time, however, reported that the German government was sending weapons to arm Mexico. Mexico violently resisted the occupation, but was unable to keep the Navy out. 21 Americans died in the battle and about 300 Mexicans. The United States held onto the port for 6 months. The occupation did not exactly endear America to the Spanish-speaking world. There were anti-US revolts in Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Uruguay. US citizens were kicked out of Mexico in some places, and America had to set up refugee camps for them. The British government was also unhappy, since they had made a private agreement with Woodrow Wilson that he would not invade Mexico without warning them beforehand. The invasion of Veracruz would prove to be the biggest influence on the decisions Mexico would make in World War I. It's possible that were it not for the occupation, Mexico might have actually fought alongside the United States in Europe in some capacity. Instead, Mexico guaranteed German companies that they could continue to operate in Mexico, partially despite the United States. Woodrow Wilson, apparently undeterred by the results of the previous invasion of Mexico, considered another one in 1917. He wanted to take control of the oil fields in Tehuantepec Isthmus and Tampico. Partially thanks to World War I, oil was beginning to be considered a crucial resource. The new Mexican president, Venustiano Carranza, said that if the US invaded and he saw any Marine come ashore, he would simply set the oil fields on fire and destroy them. The US never invaded. Within the context of this relationship between the US and Mexico, the German plan to spark a war between the two countries starts to sound more plausible. Even if they didn't think Mexico could actually win, it would at the very least mean some supplies that would have gone to Europe would stay on the other side of the Atlantic. The German High Command thought that it would be able to beat the British and the French before enough American forces could arrive to turn the tide. At the time, Germany was winning on the Eastern Front against Russia, and so they thought they would be able to divert tons of troops over to the Western Front. Mexican President Venustiano Carranza apparently took the Zimmerman telegram seriously. He assigned a military commission to assess the feasibility of the plan and to report on whether or not they could really take their land back with Germany's help. His generals concluded that it would be totally impossible for a variety of reasons. For starters, Mexico had their own problems to deal with. They were in the middle of a civil war, and Carranza didn't even really have full control over his own country. This would have made it hard to invade some other country. The Mexican factions who opposed Carranza might just team up with the US and crush him if he decided to wage war on America. The United States also just had a much stronger military than Mexico did. Even if Mexico's full military power had been united and loyal to Carranza, there was really just no realistic scenario where they could have actually beaten the United States. Germany might not care if they won or not, but Mexico did. There was also the issue of the German government being very unreliable. They promised huge financial support, but they had already told Carranza in 1916 that they wouldn't be able to give them enough gold to set up an independent national bank. Even if Germany did come through with the money, Mexico would have to buy guns, ammo, and other war supplies from the so-called ABC nations, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. This meant that other foreign relationships were at stake besides their already poor one with America. 3 years prior, the ABC nations had organized a peace conference at Niagara Falls to avoid a full-scale war between Mexico and the US over the occupation of Veracruz. If Mexico decided to ignore this to team up with Germany, their southern neighbors would not be happy. Even if Mexico somehow managed to beat the United States and take back the land that was originally theirs, what would they do then? There was no way they could just hold on to the territories forever. Reconquering and governing huge areas full of English-speaking Americans would be basically impossible. The civilian populations of these areas would also be heavily armed, and the guerrilla war against them would be a nightmare. Interestingly enough, many Americans at the time did not think that the Zimmerman telegram was real. A lot of people, especially those with German or Irish ancestry, didn't want America to join World War I. German Americans didn't want a war with their former homeland, and Irish Americans didn't want to help Britain, their former oppressors. The telegram was believed by many to be an elaborate forgery created by the British in order to try and get America to join the war. At first, some German and Mexican diplomats went along with this and tried to say that it really was just a British trick. Zimmerman himself, however, came out and admitted that the telegram was real. Germany tried to explain that really the whole plan with Mexico would have only gone forward if America had joined the war. But it was far too late at that point. Woodrow Wilson needed a viable reason to join the war, and this was it. Mexican involvement in World War I ended up being minimal, but it's interesting to wonder what might have happened if World War I really had been taken to the US border. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.